This coming week, we're going to talk about Mesoamerica, which is Central America, on Monday. And then Tuesday, we'll talk about South America with the Incas. So by the end of tomorrow, you should be able to identify major developments and advancements of those civilizations in Central America. So our oldest civilization in Central America is the Olmecs. And they lasted from around 1400 BC to 500 BC. And as you can see here, this is a giant, large carved stone head. This is one of the only ways we know very much about the Olmecs. They seem to be for religious purposes. At the top of the Olmec social hierarchy were priests and aristocrats. So keep in mind that there's been no interaction whatsoever between any of the civilizations we've talked about yet this year and those in the Americas. So even though they are hundreds of miles away, totally isolated, the Olmecs have priests and aristocrats at the top of their social hierarchy, much like our other civilizations. Again, they're really well known for their large carved stone heads, and it's especially impressive because the Olmecs did not have a wheel or any large animals. There were no large animals in Mesoamerica, to move these heads to where they lie today. The video that we will watch in class addresses how they may have potentially moved these stone heads, but it's quite fascinating. And the Olmecs, in order to be a civilization, possess all 8 basic features of a civilization. That means they have government, writing, religion, hierarchy, public works, arts and architecture, etc. Next, we're going to move on to the Maya, who existed not very far away from the Olmecs. Here's a map. You can see the Yucatan Peninsula is in blue, and that's where the Maya thrived. And the orange is the Aztecs, who come later. The Olmecs were actually right in between the two, but they didn't overlap in time. And so the Mayans thrived from 300 CE to 900 CE, and then they disappeared mysteriously without a lot of evidence of what happened. And the Maya were really impressive because of their agricultural technology. They used raised beds since they were in the rainforest. At times it would rain a great deal, and then at times it would be very dry. So they would build up the beds in which to farm, and that way water would be preserved in the dry times, but also the crops would be above the water level in the wet times. Mayan political developments, they were city-states, and so each city had a ruling chief. They had nobles and military leaders below the chief, and they took care of the public works, collecting taxes, enforcing laws. When we talk about having public works and taxes, it sounds like the Mayas are very sophisticated, and that's because they were, even though they developed all the way over in isolation in the Americas. Socially, men were usually the rulers, but sometimes there were instances of women leadership. So they were patriarchal, but not as strongly as a lot of the other civilizations we've studied. And the majority of Mayans were peasant farmers, which seems to be a trend across our civilizations, that the largest group of people is the farming class. The Mayans have many very impressive achievements and advancements. We're going to watch a video in class tomorrow about their calendar and all the developments they had. Economic developments, astronomy, and that they had strong farming technology. Remember back to earlier in the lecture and take a note in that chart about how they farmed in the rainforest. And then you're going to need to use your notes from this weekend about what crops they farmed, specific crops. Mostly men were in charge of the farming, while women were in charge of cooking and more housework. Tikal is the capital city of the Mayans on the Yucatan Peninsula, and it thrived due to trade with other civilizations in Central America. They traded honey, cocoa, cotton cloth for in exchange for the goods that they produced, which again you need to look up in your notes. And again, tomorrow on Monday we'll watch another video about their advancements. On to the Aztecs. What you see here, so you can skip the part where it says many learning advancements, name 4. You're going to fill that in as we watch the video on Monday. So we're skipping down to the Aztecs. And so take a look here. This is the capital city of the Aztecs, which is Tenochtitlan. And today it's actually where Mexico City was. And if any of you have seen or been to Mexico City, you might wonder why there's so much water. It used to be a lake, and it has since dried up. But notice all the different lands that almost look like islands. What the Aztecs are building right there is called a chinampa, and we'll go into the building of that, but they're basically floating islands that the Aztecs built. So very impressive. So around 1200 CE, the early Aztecs settled in Tenochtitlan, and they settled there. You need to look up in your notes about the founding myth, but they settled in the middle of Lake Texcoco because of a myth that your book describes, and you should write that in your notes. The Aztecs thrived due to agricultural innovations. So they built chinampas, which were beds made of reeds packed with mud. And so reeds are what grows in a swamp, and when you dry them, they're almost like piping, like PVC piping. And so what the Aztecs would do is they would create a lattice or a cross of this piping, and then they would clog it at the ends with dirt so that essentially the pipes would float. And so they'd create a whole grid and top it with dirt, and they had floating islands. They grew corn, squash, beans, many of the foods that are still popular and common in Central America today. And the Aztecs practiced a great deal of expansionism, which is they expanded their empire through war. And this war led to wealth and power because they demanded tribute. And tribute is money from conquered peoples, or payment from conquered peoples. So again, tribute is payment from conquered peoples. So once the Aztecs conquered a civilization, they would require monthly payments of corn, clothes, money, food, etc. And in order to not attack them again. And so this is how the Aztecs became very wealthy. As we flip our sheet over, you're going to use your notes from the weekend to fill in the political, social, and economic developments in the box. So you may want to pause while you do that, or skip ahead, finish the video, and then go back to that section. Okay, so in the chart, you can copy down the political developments, what the government looked like. It was led by a ruler, and then nobles, and you need to write down all the details, not just the names that are underlined. Then the warriors, then the commoners, which are the farmers, etc., and then the slaves, which were often gotten from other tribes that were conquered. The social structure was that the Aztecs were polytheistic, and their key god was Huitzilopochtli, the sun god. That was their most powerful god. And in the Aztec society, priests were extremely important because they practiced human sacrifice, and it was up to the priests to facilitate and practice this sacrifice. And the sacrifices, they believed, gave the sun god, their most important god, strength to rise every day, which again was essential for their survival with their farming. Economic structures, they had traders who made weapons and traded weapons, tools, and rope. And below the chart for education and learning, the Aztecs had schools, they studied astronomy, mathematics, and they had an accurate calendar that they got from the Mayans. They also had advanced medical knowledge. So again, similar to the Mayans, the Aztecs were very advanced. They developed a lot of very similar advancements on their own. They didn't have the influence of the Indians or the Muslims, etc. The last section is a generalization. So just remember that a generalization is when we take a limited amount of information to make a broader statement. So it refers to a larger trend than just the cases studied. For example, you're about to make a generalization, but if we were to look at only at the Olmecs, Mayas, and Aztecs and make a generalization on the whole about all civilizations in Middle America, you would also be describing the Toltecs and the Chauvin and people we haven't studied, but the idea is that in general this is true, and so it may be true. So you're going to use the information, the supporting details in the box. There's one about the Aztecs, the Maya, and the Inca, and you're going to make a generalization about civilizations in Mesoamerica, and we will check that tomorrow. Or on Monday, sorry. Have a great weekend, and we will see you on Monday.